teen, most people thought of me as a pretty good kid, and I did my best to maintain that image. I held a reasonable GPA, was editor in chief of the school newspaper, had a short lived stint on the school pep squad, but inside, things felt messy and unreliable. I would put school me away when I arrived home, and the uncertain, frustrated self would step forward and quietly but firmly take control of me. I was restless, confused about the inner battles in my head, and explosively angry. Like most teenagers, I often felt very much like two very different people were inhabiting my brain. It was really hard to keep the nice guy in control. My parents divorced when I was in the delicate tween years. My dad fell in love with a tiny blonde and left my mom to be with her. He got a new house, a new wife, 4 new stepkids, and visitation with us on Wednesday nights and all day Saturday. My mom didn't get anything new out of the deal. Instead, she kept the mortgage, the complicated kids, and the broken heart. By the time I hit full teen, my mom was working full time, getting her MBA at night and juggling 2 maladjusted teenagers who put the perfect face on for the world, all while seething hate and indifference at home. Every ounce of teenage angst I could dredge up, I reserved for her. I fought her every step of the way, while smiling pretty for the dad who had proved he could leave you at the drop of a hat. I worked my ass off to keep him happy and had nothing left when it came to my mom. It was, by far, one of the hardest times of her life. Her emotional pain made manifest with physical symptoms like lockjaw for an entire year. With my mom just trying to keep it together, and my dad mostly occupied by his new family, I was in serious need of attention. I found it in a group of young men, some of whom I dated, and all of whom I kept around even after we broke up. Because of this catch and release program, all my exes became friends. And so, I had a ragtag group of fellas to hang out with, most of whom see me with my pants off. There was Jay, a kid who feasted on adrenaline in any form, a quiet little ball of rage who could slip into the absolute tenderness of an artist when you could slow him down. His stepdad used to enjoy holding him under the water in the trailer park pool, laughing loudly while Jay struggled and fought to break the surface. Visiting Jay's trailer was a balancing act, one that often required us to get up and get out at any moment. Jay was all bad ideas and tender affection, a wild dichotomy of a teenager struggling and hurting and trying to quiet the rage in his head. Then there was Joshua. He had a couple years on us, and while we were finishing up our senior year at high school, he was at his first year at a local college. Joshua came from a family where nobody ever pretended to drown anyone, and his mother was a powerhouse of a woman. His dad kind, though stern. When we first met, Joshua was quiet and earnest, but never fully calm. He'd always flirted with his own bad decisions, and putting Jay and Joshua together was maybe one of my worst ideas ever. Those two got along like a house on fire, and together they found new and interesting ways to break or relocate things. They introduced me to rock climbing, though Jay rarely did so safely. He insisted on teaching me everything I needed to know to stay alive, but for him, no harness needed. They would jump off of anything they thought they could survive, the cliffs in La Jolla being a favorite, and the Ingram Street Bridge being another. Though for that, they would jump in the middle of the night, usually naked. Like all things in the world of bored teenagers, rock climbing had to evolve into something more interesting. Eventually, we started looking for structures we could rappel off of, ones that were absolutely not designed for that purpose. We hit the jackpot with the Civic Center parking lot downtown. From the outside, it looked like any other parking structure, but from the inside, it had exactly what we needed. A spiral ramp that climbed 12 stories high, creating a pocket in the middle of the structure protected from view and perfect for rappelling with minimal chance of getting caught. We'd drive to the top, hook up ropes to Joshua's truck, and buckle into a harness. From there, you could simply clip in and jump off. I start out with the standard rappel technique, walking my way down, feet contacting the wall as much as possible, carefully controlling my slow descent. Once I got the hang of that, I quickly graduated to a military-style rappel, pushing my feet off hard to jump from one level to the next, zipping down 12 stories in mere seconds. It was exhilarating. And the best part was that you could simply ride the elevator back up and do it again, less than a minute later. Once, while riding back up for another turn, a valet entered the elevator and looked me up and down. My hair was piled in a loose bun at the top of my head. I wore shorts, a sports top, harness. "What are you doing?" he asked. I gave him my own once over, noticing his crisp, clean trousers and red vest, and made a decision. We're pulling off the structure. "You want to go?" His eyes grew wide, and then a huge smile broke over his face. He stripped off his vest, climbed into my harness, and while I ran him through a quick and dirty lesson, he was ready to go by the time we reached the top. "Guys, this is Pete. He's going over." The boys clicked him into a rope, showed him how to control his descent, slapped him on the back as he disappeared over the edge. I don't think I ever saw a valet smile that big. Probably his best shift ever. Most weekends, I would spend the evening with them. Come home by curfew, wait an hour, go right back out the window. My mom's love for me was explosive, and most evenings we'd fight so loud we could be heard at the end of the block. Her worry was a thick thing between us, wrapping me in a blanket of something I didn't understand. By the time night fell, her love felt like oppression, and I would pace my room, trying to slow my breath and quiet the cacophony in my head. She'd go to bed thinking I was safely ensconced in my room for the night and pass out exhausted, just as I was hitting a fever pitch of confinement. As soon as I knew she was asleep, I'd pop out the scream and slip into the yard, my mind quieting the dark and concentration of escape. There was always a car with a smiling boy waiting for me at the end of the block. We'd set out to pick up the other curfew breakers, piling in and driving around aimlessly or finding something to hook into so we could jump off. The real trouble started with a Louisville slugger. Driving up into the hills where the rich people live. By the way, that's Mount Soledad. There's a story about Mount Soledad and West Tech Securities. Did you hear it? Sort of. Driving up to the hills where the rich people lived, they often had fancy mailboxes, ones that were, to the restless eye of a teen, just begging to be smashed. The damn things were overly ostentatious, and Jay could not let that stand. "So beautiful on the street," he'd say. "And then this fucking monstrosity has to ruin everything?" He'd swing, and the box would shatter. I'd sit in the back seat and watch, never opting to take my own turn at the bat, but loving the explosion of noise and materials as they would rain down behind the speeding car. It was cathartic somehow. One night, we came across a particularly upsetting box. It was cubist and giant, a solid structure of metal and fucking entitlement. There was a sleek black car in the driveway with a flag waving gently from the hood. The house stood hulking and dark behind a large iron gate. "That one," Jay pointed with a bat as Joshua accelerated towards it. Jay lifted his bat high and took a swing, all his anger and frustration focused on this, the stupidest of all mailboxes that had to die. His bat connected, and instead of the expected sound of twisting metal, Jay's body ricocheted backwards into the car, the bat exploding as it finally met its match. "Motherfucker!" Jay bellowed, while shards of bat sprayed back into us. Joshua stopped the car, and all of us stared in disbelief at the mailbox that fought back. Jay started to scramble out of the car towards it, but we hauled him back in, knowing we'd already made too much of noise to stay. "We'll get it another day, brother," Joshua promised. And we carried on with our night, devoid of our trusty baseball bat and Jay in a nasty temper. The following weekend, the boys made a trip across the border to pick up some good old-fashioned Mexican fireworks. A stash of M80s were smuggled back into the U.S. in Joshua's truck. For kicks, the boys took the small explosives apart and had the brilliant idea to combine their powder to make something even stronger, essentially making their own little pipe bomb factory in Joshua's bedroom. That mailbox, it was going down. I think it's important to say that explosives in the hands of teenagers, it's a very bad idea, like kind of the worst. I think it's also important to say that I was mostly along for the ride, okay? Much like video games, I'm pretty happy just to watch others play. I don't really need to be involved to get something out of the experience. So I was in the back of the car down the block when they set it off. Joshua parked the car, and I wished them luck as they crept up like cat burglars, slipping their largest pipe bomb into the box, and then lit it off, running wildly towards the car as the fuse sparked and spit. The explosion was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. Bright white and hot, even from a distance, we marveled as the metal of the mailbox ripped to shreds and whistled through the air. We were at a safe distance to avoid the shrapnel, but we all ducked anyway, and a chorus of "Tam!" rushed out of all of us. The noise was so loud that our ears rang for a moment. Was it supposed to be that big? I squeaked. I don't think so, but that was awesome! The guys were hooting and hollering as Joshua started the engine, and his tires squealed as we pulled off the street. A local security patrol screamed around the corner, and we fled, engaged in a car chase. We finally lost him when someone dumped a massive bucket of stolen golf balls out the back. And the patrol car screeched to a halt, stunned by the bouncing white orbs, probably fearing we'd release more explosives. Once we were safely away, Joshua dropped me a couple blocks from home, and I managed to sneak back into the house, my heart racing, but my head clear. I was in bed for only an hour or so before the police knocked on our front door. My mom came to fetch me, and I remember the look on her face. She looked so small. The police are here. They'd like to speak to you. I followed her down the hall and into the living room, where I was invited to sit on my own couch by a pair of detectives and the armed uniforms at their back. Mom sat close, and I could feel her body trembling next to mine. I started to cry before they asked a single question and managed to answer them vaguely, sniffing through my snot and tears. They claimed they had everyone from the car in custody already, and this interview was to determine if I was to join them. Turns out we'd taken up battle against the wrong mailbox, setting into action an international incident. That night, we had unwittingly managed to blow up the mailbox of the Brazilian diplomat. Yeah. I was not arrested that night, but the guys who were 18 or older, they were. The whole thing, it kind of served as a turning point in my relationship with my mom. As she sat quietly next to me while her daughter was questioned by the police, her lips pressed firmly together in a straight, caustic line, holding my hand and shaking with fear, I understood what I had done to her. I understood that she was working so hard, and she was so lonely and so afraid of what would happen to us kids. I understood that I had put her under the scrutiny of the police, and worse, of my father, who would undoubtedly judge her for this. And I did this to her for one simple reason, because I was all rebellion, and she had the audacity to love me too hard. I made her small and scared because I didn't want to be told what to do or obey any of her rules. As an adult, I admitted to my mom that I was a shitty teenager, and it wasn't fair, the burden I put on her. Your dad proved he could leave, she told me. You knew I'd always stay, and so I was the only one you could be angry with. You hurt me because you were hurting, and because you trusted me to handle those big feelings. I have my own teenagers now. I'm still married to their dad, and they live in a calm home with love and humor and patience and respect. Unlike the fellows of my youth, their father has never even considered causing an international incident. They know unconditional love, just like I did. I wish I could have understood that love sooner. When my daughters are at their worst, I remind myself it is a sign of their trust. They know I will not leave. I hope they never have to push the limits to see how deeply their parents' love for them flows. I hope that when their own inner conflict has them questioning everything, the struggle doesn't send them into the dark with a baseball bat, or worse, a pipe bomb. I hope their understanding of love is steady and ongoing and maybe a little bit boring. I hope they don't find it like I did, in an explosion of light and metal in the middle of the night, well after curfew.
Elaine Gingery, everybody.